Hi class, today we're going to be diving a little bit into conditionals. But first, a quick recap is last lesson we learned how to declare variables and we understood how different data types work in Python. So we covered strings, floats, integers, and booleans. And today we're going to be learning a little bit more about how we can compare these data types in Python. So in Python, we have things called operators, and operators are essentially ways we can use to create expressions. And when, like in math, for example, we normally write an expression, and if that expression is true, we will say this expression is true. So this is the same way that we will be kind of thinking about this in Python. So if we write an expression, we're expecting it to return either true or false. And that's why expressions result in booleans. And reminder, booleans are either true or false. So essentially in Python, we want to use expressions to build logic in our code. And we'll take a quick look on how we do that. So just a little bit of a review or just more new material. If you would take a look at this table, we see that we can use a double equals operator that compares the values of two different variables. And we can also use a exclamation mark equals, and that basically means not. So whenever in Python code you see an exclamation mark, keep in mind that as basically negating the expression. So kind of like making the opposite version of it. So when we say not equals, if we have A is not equal to B, if that expression is true, it will return true. If it's false, it will return false. And likewise, we also have things where we compare greater than and less than. And these are things that we can all compare with floats and integers. So to keep in mind, floats and integers are comparable, and make sure that we're using double equals in a way that is comparing equality of two variables. But when we use single equals, like how we do declare a variable bar, we're just declaring a value to a variable. And so that is just kind of like separating the two different cases that we may get with equals. We can also have multiple conditions in Python. So I like to think of multiple conditions as like, I need two conditions to be true in order for something to be like fully true, right? So in this case, we have example x equal 5. So that's checking if x is the value 5. And then and y is equal 3, which checks that y is the value 3. So if these two conditions are true, then our whole expression right here will evaluate to true. But if either one of them is false, then the whole expression evaluates to false. All right, and that's when we use and. Another keyword that we're going to use is or, and or also combines multiple conditions, but it really means that if at least one side is true, then the whole expression will evaluate to true. So here's an example here. If either side, either condition is true, then our expression will return true. Okay, so let's take a quick look at how we can write some Boolean expressions. So if we declare, let's say, a variable x is equal to 3, let's say print x is equal to 5, right? And we're expecting this to return false because x is not the value 5. But what if we nest two different conditions? What if we say and x is equal 3? What do you guys think that would print? Let's try that out real quick. So that will also print false. And the reason why is because x cannot equal to two values. And we remember that when we use and, both sides of the conditions must be true. So let's also try, let's say if we declare a variable y is equal to 3.0, and we say y is equal x, and let's try to print that out and see if it would evaluate. Okay, so it evaluates to true. And the reason why is because we can compare floats and integers. And so in this case, these two conditions are true. What if we wanted to compare strings? So let's say if I want to declare a string, my string is equal to cool. So if I have my string, let's say I want to compare and check like print does my string equal cool? Like how would Python think about these two strings? So we just have one extra space out there. Let's see. Yeah, so Python really checks for string equality, so these strings have to be exactly the same. Likewise, we can also do or let's say if my string is equal cool, right? So we're saying that my string could be equal to this this value, or it can be equal to this value. So let's see what would happen there. Okay, so we see that we print a true, and the reason why is because when we use ORs, we're basically trying to check if at least one condition is true. So we have two conditions. This evaluates to false, but this condition evaluates to true. And if we use OR, we're only checking if one of these conditions are true, then we will just return true. And that is what is printed. Okay, so now that we've learned a little bit about operators, let's dive in and how we can write conditions for our code. So again, conditions form the logic of our program. So if we want to like say, if something happens, then do something, this is all the logic that the computer will take in and basically follow these directions. So if we go back to an example of a condition, if I was doing my homework, I want to make sure I do all of my homework before I can like watch TV. So this is all logic that we're going to form for the computer. So the way we do this is using if statements. So this is really similar to how we would say like conditions in real life. So we're going to say like, if I do my homework, then I can eat cake, right? So these are all conditions that we want to make for ourselves. And likewise, we want to make for a computer. And the way we do this is through this format where we say, if this condition, then we're going to do something in the body. And I'll actually show you a quick example later. So a quick reminder is that the types of if statements that we'll see is things like a single check. So if we use a single check, then that will be using one single if statement. And if we have two specific conditions, then we're going to use an if and an else. And likewise, if we have more than two conditions, we'll be using something called if, else if, and else. And I'll actually show you a quick example right now. So in this example, we're essentially declaring a variable for, and we're checking if bar is equal to, right? So in this case, this is basically the logic that we want to do. So in this case, bar will actually, this code will actually not print because this condition is not true, and therefore this is never executed. And let's take a look at another example. So let's see. So if is cat is true, then print a cat, else print a dog. So in this case, we're going to be using two different conditions, and that's why we use keyword if and else. And notice again that whenever we execute the code, we want to make sure we indent the body of the if statement. So again, this is kind of the format that we want to follow when we write these logical expressions. Likewise, this is a little bit of a crazier example because we have a lot of cases, right? So in the past two cases, or in the past two examples, we had only a case where we're checking one condition, and then with the if else, we were checking two conditions. But when we have more than two conditions, we want to use something called elif. And elif basically stands for else if, so it's like the middle condition. So essentially what we do is we check through each of these conditions to make sure that either or any one of these get executed. And if none of these are true, then we're just going to fall back into our else condition. So let's take a look at this example. So shoe color is declared as green, and we essentially want to check the values of shoe color and checking if it's different colors, right? So we know by following this code, our code will go down here and check, hey, is shoe color equal to red? Well, nope. So we're going to move on to the next case, the elif case. And the elif case is going to check if it's orange, which is not true. So we're going to jump again, and we realize it's not yellow. And so we jump again. So now we're at else if. And we see that shoe color evaluates, this expression evaluates to true. And so we're going to go into the body and print green. So that's how this kind of like structure works. We're going to go through each condition until we find one that satisfies, and we do the body of what, like we execute the body of the code, right? So now we see that this is also a very similar format. So we want to make sure that we're doing the indentation, because if we don't indent our code inside, then the Python code will not run. So a little bit tips for using if statements: make sure that all if conditions start with a single if at least. And it cannot start with elif and else because they come after, like strictly after if. And make sure we're only executing one branch. So by what I mean by one branch is that when we saw if, else if, and else, these are all branches. So in this example, we had 5 different branches, and we want to make sure that we're executing just one. Because the way Python works is that it follows through the commands until you get a case that satisfies, and then you print it out and you're done. So going back to this slide, make sure to execute one branch. And I like to think about it as like I have a golden ticket, and if I give my golden ticket to a single branch, so if I enter the else if, I'm giving the ticket to enter that branch. And so once I print, I'm done because I have no more kind of like golden tickets to enter another branch. So let's kind of practice how we're going to write some if statements. So if let's say we're in a scenario where we're at an amusement park, and we're really excited to be riding a roller coaster. However, like regular roller coasters, we're going to have restrictions in terms of like your height. And also, there's also, if you buy a fast pass, maybe your wait time will be shorter. So let's declare a variable for our height. So let's say we are 120 inches, right? And let's say I did buy a fast pass. So fast passes are things that help you, like a ticket, so that you don't have to wait as long as other people. And so let's say I bought a fast pass. So fast pass is true. So I have my 2 variables, and now I want to check if I can write this right. So let's go ahead and write if height is greater than equal to 120. So that is the restriction of the ride. So they only take people who are at this height or greater. Then we will print you can ride this roller coaster. And then if you can either ride this roller coaster or you may not ride. So the other case is for people who are shorter than 120 inches, and that will be you may not ride. So these are the 2 cases that we're going to have, and let's try to run our code and see what will happen. So it says you can ride this roller coaster because 120 is greater than or equal to 120. So that's great. What if we said after this, when we enter into the ride, they're going to split you into two different lines. One being the people who bought fast passes and have like only have to wait 5 minutes versus regular students or people who ride the ride, and they don't have to wait however long it takes. So let's check like if fast pass is equals true. That means I have a fast pass. Then we're going to print your wait time is 10 minutes, right? So that's not too bad. And then we know the other case. So remember, when we're dealing with comparing Booleans, fast pass will always be either true or false. And so in this case, we can just use an else statement to check that, because we know the other option for fast pass must be false. So we'll say your wait time is 25 minutes, right? So now we kind of like, you see here, we're kind of using a nested if statement, right? We're nesting an if statement inside of an if statement. And what we basically do, so in this logic, the way our code runs is it's gonna first check, is height greater than or equal to 120? And that's true. So we're gonna go in and print, you can ride this roller coaster. and then we execute what's inside of this. So you see that they're both in the same indentation, and that's really important because if we indented this wrong, if we indented if inside even more, then our code will not run. And as you can see, the code editor actually tells us, like the red squiggly lines, that this is incorrect. So we go back here and we're making sure we're indenting all of our code in the right tab. And so now we're going to check, is FastPass equal true? And I did buy a FastPass, so it will print my wait time is 10 minutes, and it will exit after this, because remember, we only have one golden ticket to each if branch. And so if we've entered this if branch, then we're done. So let's try printing this out. And we see that it prints out exactly what we thought. It prints out, you can ride this roller coaster, and then the inside statements where you only have to wait 10 minutes. And by building this logic, now we're able to tell the computer what to do based on certain conditions. So let's say that maybe I lost my FastPass. And if I lost my FastPass, then my FastPass will be false. And let's see what will happen here. So cool. Okay, so it says you can still ride this roller coaster, but the wait time will be 25 minutes. And that makes sense because remember, we're entering into this if statement, and then we check these two conditions. And since FastPass is now false, it will print this else case, and it will enter this else case and print it out. And a reminder that we're not going to be entering this case at all, because we're basically going to focus on this case, and then we're going to focus on the inside, the inner if statement in here. And that's why this is kind of a concept that we call nested if statements. So let's recap a little bit what we learned today. We learned the importance of using operators to compare different data types, and we also learned how to write our own conditions using if statements. And important things I want you guys to take away is that it's important that we know that every time we enter into an if statement, that we're only going to execute one branch. And remember, we would call one branch a branch meaning either an if, an elif, or an else case, right? And remember, when we want to indent our code, right, we want to indent the code that we're going to be executing whenever we enter into a branch. So make sure to do that, or else you'll run into some errors along the way. And we learned to use conditions. And when we learn to use conditions, we learned that we can use and or to combine conditions, as well as using nested if statements to combine conditions as well. So you'll see an example in the reading where we kind of compare the usage of and or with if statements, because they kind of work together and they kind of do similar things. So make sure you practice a lot on the logic, because using if statements is really important for our code, because it essentially gives direction to the computer in what to do. And so make sure you practice a lot, and we'll see you guys in the next lesson. Thank you.